Good morning, Jim Laird joining you live from Dioriama, Nicaragua. Hope you're doing well today as you're preparing for Christmas. Let me just get this live stream going on Instagram. And there we are. We are going on Instagram now. So excellent. Hope you're doing well today. I've been fairly busy doing a lot of coaching calls, doing group coaching stuff. It's a lot of fun. Um, I wanted to do this today. Um, just kind of see some of the common mistakes that I see happening over and over again. And we'll start with myself. This will be more performance based in the beginning, and then we'll transition into what I see every day when I'm coaching people. Um, the first one was with myself, and when I was in high school, I dominated football, wrestling, mainly because I was just stronger than everyone else. I spent a lot of time in the weight room. That worked really well in high school, and then I went to college and I really got sucked into. I just love the weight room so much that I ended up getting hurt. I hurt my back in the weight room doing some really crazy, like partial top end squats with like 700 plus pounds. I ended up tweaking my back in the middle of spring training, and it really kind of put a. It really affected my career essentially in football. And I actually had one of the assistants coaches. I was at a school that were being strong was just like, you know, really pushed. And yes, you want to be strong, but there comes a point where strength takes away from your ability to move and be athletic if it's pushed to the extreme. And I was plenty strong. I was one of the strongest guys on the team. And it served me well in high school, but once you get to college, you need to be able to move as well. And I could move fairly well, but I would have been much better served and the funny thing is when football ended, I got back into MMA and wrestling, and I still lifted, but I couldn't lift at the extremes that I was lifting at in football because I was busy with wrestling practice every day. So I would have been much better served to lift less and do something like wrestling or MMA training, and then spent a lot of time running routes, running pass routes, working on my footwork. Things like that would have been much more beneficial and would have carried over onto the field much more than doing some of the things that I was doing in the weight room. Um, so that was a hard lesson I learned very early. And I also learned this with a lot of my NFL guys that I worked with. There was a number of my NFL guys that I that actually got hurt in their sprint training. They would go do combine training, and the training they were being run through was so above their pay grade that they either got injured or they got slower. And then they would come to me and be like, "Hey, I've only got like 6 weeks to get ready, for my tryout, my free agency tryout," and they were injured, and the one thing we would do is just get them healthy, and guess what? All of a sudden you get them healthy, you get them training at a level that is appropriate for them, and they end up doing very well. Both of these free agents that I worked with ended up making an NFL roster um, because they weren't hurt. So, the number one thing as a coach is do no harm, make sure you're not hurting people. And I see this in high school all the time. Kids would I had a number of kids early in my career that I rehab from injuries in the weight room, injuries from doing, high speed treadmill programs. They do vertical jump programs. They come back after the program and they actually regressed because the training was so far above their ability to adapt. And a lot of people get caught up in those bells and whistles where if you take somebody who's a track athlete or a young high school kid, and you look at the way they skip and you look at all the basic fundamental things that they do, and all of a sudden you add some really basic calisthenics into their warm up and you do that consistently over time, all of a sudden it's like, oh, they're moving better. Or the classic is, the kid that spent all these monies going to speed camps gets slower. And then I take a half a tenth or half a second off his 40 just by teaching him how to start properly in 5 minutes. So there's a lot of details that are often overlooked, the low hanging fruit side of things. The other thing that really in the beginning of my career, when I went from Liberty, which was a 1AA school, to Arizona, I thought, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to have all these high level athletes that I'm working with. We're going to be able to do so many cool advanced forms of training and I was, studying West Side. I was looking at all these different modalities. And I got to Arizona and I remember sitting down with the head strength coach. His name was Brad Arnett. He's still a good friend of mine today. And I remember sitting there going like, what's going on here? And he's like, dude, these are some like world-class high level athletes that were very, very not good in the weight room, like had problems squatting, had problems with basic movements, skipping. Um, but they were highly skilled at their sport, but they were lacking a fundamental foundation. It was like real basic stuff like the reverse hyper, which was like um, Louis Simmons kind of thing. We had reverse hypers, and there were kids that could barely do a reverse hyper with body weight, And so I had this idea that I was going to go to Arizona and I was going to see all this fancy training, and I didn't see that. What I saw was when we made them do the basics, they got better, and it was simple. It wasn't anything spectacular. Um, so I think a lot of people get caught up in, and then also seeing, one of the reasons I didn't end up in college is I saw what was happening. I saw, there would be coaches that were great to work with, and there would be coaches that were not so great to work with. You would have coaches that would decide that their linemen needed to run like 3 miles or 2 miles, and it would destroy everything you did on the off season. So when you're in college and you're working with all these different teams, you're battling the coach a lot of times. It's very hard to find coaches that are on the same page as you, and a lot of times it can undermine your success. And then also in college, the strength coach is usually the first person to get fired, and a lot of times they don't really look at they have a hard time like with metrics, like how do we know the strength program is actually working? And if we're judging it on just on heavier weights lifted, that can be kind of deceiving because you can have kids getting a lot stronger, but they're actually getting better on the field. So it's really hard to see and to judge, what's going on the field, and if what you're doing in the weight room actually is carrying over to the field. It's a lot more complicated than just everybody's getting stronger, because you can get stronger at certain things, and it actually takes away from your ability to perform certain sports. And, this really, I worked with a lot of kids later on in my career, baseball pitchers in particular, quarterbacks that actually loved the weight room. They were so in love with the weight room. I had one kid who could throw over 100 miles an hour, and he was obsessed with bench press and deadlift, and it was starting to affect his ability to throw. And I was like, look, dude, like you have a talent, you could play in the majors. Like you've got the rest of your life to power lift. This is not the time for you to be pushing max bench press when you're trying to throw, and, I had a coach tell me that in college too. He's like, dude, you're strong enough. You need to focus on other things. I didn't listen. So it's hard when you're passionate about certain things, but that influenced my career, particularly with overhead athletes, volleyball players, baseball players, basketball players that, hey, they need to train a little bit different. They need to do things where they're, moving and shifting and rotating as opposed to just doing the traditional power lifts. The other thing I saw a lot, or I still see today, is just people avoiding the low-hanging fruit. For example, you have the woman who's trying to lose weight. She's killing herself. She's doing classes. She's running. She's doing all sorts of stuff. And she either doesn't have a gallbladder, which makes it very hard to digest food. You end up overeating. You end up, being highly inflamed. Or she's on like a really aggressive birth control or SSRIs, people that are in a lot of pain, that 9 times out of 10, if they're older, they're on a statin drug. So you need to look at the medications that you're on. Are the medications that you're taking countering what you're trying to accomplish? If you're a female and you want to lean out a little bit and you're on birth control, it's going to be very difficult for you to lean out. So, with the women in particular, thinking women tend to fall into this trap that they can outrun, they can burn fat off by running or high intense exercise. The exercise is good. The walking is good to reduce stress. It does burn some body fat, but you can do the spinning class and all of a sudden, your appetite just ravenously goes up, and it's very hard for you to control what you eat because you're just ravenously hungry. And then you just you negate that spinning class by one donut. And it's so easy to eat one donut. You have to do, I don't know the numbers, but it's just really easy to undo training with a couple bad food choices. So you're much better off training at a moderate level, lifting some weights, preserving your muscle mass, getting outside, fixing your circadian rhythm, focus on getting your rest, and then eating a sensible, well-rounded diet. That's what works over the long run. How many women that I've worked with over the years that I saved from running marathons, they thought it was going to be the key to them losing body fat, and they actually got fatter. The more they ran, the fatter they got. And it wasn't until we cut back and got them in the weight room and reduced their exercise to walking and maybe a couple, you know, quick aerodyne sessions a week, where they're doing 10 seconds on, 45 seconds off for a total of like 6 minutes. And then the rest of the time is walking and lifting, that they would see results, and they drop, tons of body fat really quickly. So, especially for women, strength training combined with walking, combined with, eating, fistful of protein at every meal, vegetables and moderate starch, depending on where you're at and what your goals are. That's really the formula for long-term success. And then building a fundamental base, a foundation of habits. It doesn't matter whether it's high school kids, how many high school kids that I worked with that were obsessed about taking creatine or pre-workout. And it's like, okay, man, like, so you're taking creatine. Let's write down everything that you eat all day. Oh, well, you're under eating by 1,000 or 1,500 calories a day. And when you do go over your calorie intake, it's mostly like chips and pizza, pop tarts and whatever else. So you're basically getting really expensive urine by basically taking this creatine. And creatine does work, but it's not going to offset a horrible diet and not sleeping. And then, kids that want pre-workout, I'm like, you're 14 years old, you're 15, you're 16 years old. There's no way you need more energy. Like, you should have plenty of energy. What time do you go to bed? Well, I'm up at 1 a.m. on my phone or whatever. It's like, that pre-workout is not going to, counter the, you're just going to end up digging yourself a hole, and you're just spending money that you don't need to spend. Like, get your butt in bed and get some sleep, not that I'm saying there's not a time to take pre-workout and things like that, but overall, it's just not, it's expensive. There's a lot of garbage in it. And then it also masks, it masks fatigue temporarily. So it allows you to overreach, which is something I learned the hard way too. I trained like a maniac for a long time. I was on performance enhancing drugs. I was taking stimulants. I was progressing in the gym, getting stronger. And then I ended up, getting ulcerative colitis and almost bleeding to death sitting on the toilet. So even though I was progressing in the weight room, my health was deteriorating because I was propping myself up. If I wasn't on the performance enhancing drugs, if I wasn't taking the stimulants, I wouldn't have been able to push myself to the point of making myself sick. Right. So a lot of people fall into that trap. And just the basic fundamental stuff. Like, people want to do sexy things, and there's a time and place for that if you're prepared. But people don't understand the level of preparation that goes into training at a super high level. So picking exercises that are good for your structure, that are relatively easy for you to complete and learn quickly. Most people don't have hours and hours to train to prepare themselves for high level type training. That's where machines come in. That's where, certain modifications come in, squatting off a box, using things like the hack squat. So there's a really low learning curve, so you can get people building muscle really quickly. We don't need them doing any complicated things. I love med ball throws and things like that for athletes, as opposed to like Olympic lifts, because the turnover time, the amount of time it takes to teach kids the Olympic lifts can be a lot. It depends on the kid. Some kids pick things up really quickly, whereas I can have a kid throwing a med ball on day one. And of course, a lot of times with kids, they are doing Olympic lifts in their program at school. So getting them moving well, getting them generally stronger, and then teaching them technical how to do, I like to do, when I have kids that do a lot of Olympic lifts, I will do them as part of a warm up with submaximal weights, to work on that skill, but while they're fresh. And we usually would do that in, during the entire training process. We'd do like snatch one day, maybe cleans the other day as part of a warm up with submaximal weight. And they go to school and they'd set records on those exercises because they got generally stronger, and they also worked on their technique when they weren't tired. So I do a lot of that as well. Um, so it's a lot of the problems I've seen is people, they just don't want to do the low hanging fruit. They're so interested in chasing what's sexy. Um, even people today, like that I work with, guys in the group that I have, that are biohacker type people. They're always looking for, methylene blue, or they're looking for this, or they're looking for that. And you start asking them about sleep, you start asking them about stress, they kind of roll their eyes. And those, all those things are appropriate. They're tools, but you've got to have that base foundation down before you start chasing a lot of these tools. And with most people, their lifestyle, they just, I've gone through all my data for like the last 8 years. And even here in Nicaragua, I mean, I'm doing this broadcast outside. I've been working virtually now for about 3 years. And before that, it was all in person. I did a few podcasts and stuff. I didn't do a lot of work online. I didn't do a lot of work in front of the computer. And mostly I trained in person. I wish I would have built an email list and all that stuff. That would have been very helpful. But I was more concerned about training people in person. And my data from 4 or 5 years ago, when I was training, 8 to 10 people an hour, 4 to 6 sessions a day, my perceived level of stress and my body was in a much more relaxed, calm state than it is now doing 4 or 5 virtual sessions with either group coaching or individual coaching. Because on this live, for example, I'm having to be entertaining, I'm having to be focused, I'm having to be 100% like dialed in. I just can't be on here and be lazy and kind of stare off into space. I mean, you're not going to want to watch that, and rightly so. But people underestimate, if you're sitting in front of a computer all day in an office, that's incredibly stressful on your system, even though you're not doing anything. Low level manual labor where you're moving around throughout the day is incredibly, incredibly therapeutic to the human body. And it shows up in my data. Even though I like after this call, I'll go for a little walk, I'll move around. It doesn't make up for me sitting here for an hour. I don't make up for that. I can negate that, but I've noticed that my body is not in as good a place. I am older, but it's not as good in a place as when I was training people in person and moving around all day throughout the day. Even though I would have 8 people training at once, that's what I'm used to as a strength coach. I'm used to working with groups of 40, 50 people at a time. And you get people set up, and a lot of them had been with me for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so you become like a choir director. If you have somebody new, you give them a little more attention. But that's where the exercise selection fit comes in. You select exercises they can actually get in a good position and do well. They don't need to be overly coached. If you're having to like really coach somebody intensely, it's probably not the right exercise for them at that time. And I could go, if you're training people, you should be able to leave the room for 5 or 10 minutes without worrying about people like, dying. Uh, a lot of times, if you're worried about that, that the exercises are too complex, or they're not at the appropriate level for that person. So I could go up front, sign a package for FedEx, come back into the room. I'd be loading plates, moving, helping people with things. So I noticed a huge difference in shifting to virtual work, and it's a big stress. So if you work in an office all day, you need to get outside. You need to move around every 45, 50 minutes, get up, move around, do some cross connects, go for a walk. That's some really low hanging fruit, as opposed to trying to and you should go to the gym and you should train, but to think that 3 high intensity sessions a week is going to make up for you sitting on your butt 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week, it is not the case. If you think that supplements and peptides and TRT is going to make up for a lack of sleep, or at least effort to sleep more, or relaxation and shutting down, a lot of times these supplements, the TRT, the thyroid, all these things, they rev you up. And so a lot of times if you're exhausted and you start taking these things without implementing some self-care stuff, you end up just digging the hole deeper and you end up crashing the car at like 90 miles an hour instead of crashing it at 30. Because you got to remember, when you're fatigued, you're exhausted, your body is telling you, hey, like you need to slow your roll. Like we need to put some energy back into the system. And if you override that with peptides, with TRT, with whatever you're doing, supplements, there needs to be a conscious effort to relax and rest and sleep so that you don't, drive the car off the road. You need to take the car into the shop. Even, you're driving your car to change the oil, you have to actually pull it into the station, and you have to, shut it off and get the maintenance done on it. So, Joel Jameson talks all the time about, yes, intensity is important. Teaching people to push is important, but you also have to teach people to shut it off completely. And one of the things that I've noticed for myself, the joys of live podcasts. The dogs are, somebody's walking around from street. Oh yeah, it's Julio. So one of the things that where was I? Oh, breathing. That's something that a lot of people will kind of like just kind of roll their eyes at. And a lot of times people that are, buenos dias, ¿cómo estás, amigo? Muy bien, gracias. A lot of times people will not understand I used to have a sign on the gym door, the real work begins now. And so if you're in this revved up, high level, high breathing state, and you take that with you, that's why one of the biggest things I tell people is like the best thing you can do is when you're driving your car, when you're in a grocery store, when you're just walking around, when I'm driving my motorcycle, the tongue's in the roof of my mouth, I'm breathing as little as I can. I'm slowing everything down and becoming present in the moment. That adds up over time. If you're walking around with your mouth open and you're over breathing, your respiratory rate's really, really high. That's going to take away resources from your body. It's going to take away from your body's ability to recover. So just simple things like being mindful, putting the tongue in the roof of your mouth, breathing through your nose, chilling out before you leave the gym. A lot of people, they'll go train, particularly in the evening, they'll work really hard, and then they'll just walk out of the gym. You can do crocodile breathing. You can lay flat on the floor, put a little pillow under your stomach and just breathe into the nose, take about, 4 to 6 breaths with a long exhale and a pause, and then just sit there for a minute and just completely melt into the floor. I used to make my high school kids and my middle school kids do this in a group. After every training session, we would, the parents looked at me like I was nuts. Or you could sit in like a deep squat, holding on to like, a Smith machine set about chest level, holding on to the squat rack, and just round over and just breathe and relax. Another good way to do it is laying on your back, feet at 90 degrees, and just sit there and just, put a pillow behind your head if you're a big meathead like me that, when I lay on the ground, my head doesn't touch the ground. So I have to put something behind my head. You just sit there, breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth, slow everything down, and calm yourself down so you can kickstart the recovery process. A lot of people, they come to the gym revved up, they train revved up, and then they go home revved up. You need to slow that nervous system down. I'm a big fan of the Uberman non-sleep deep rest. A lot of people need to learn. Like, I can't tell you the number of people I've worked with. I make them do the non-sleep deep rest. And I fell into this category too, where I literally felt uncomfortable relaxing and slowing down. And once you learn how to do that and you shut off, you're going to get much better results in your training because your digestion is going to improve. Your sleep's going to improve. You have to be able to turn it on and turn it off. And in our modern world, we don't have the physical stress that we used to have, but we have this constant chronic, scrolling, constant chronic low-level stress that is much harder, I believe, on our physiology in the long run than it is to do manual labor or, run from a bear every once in a while where it's done. This chronic low-level stress, read Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, it generally just degrades people over time. And so you need to be able to take time to just go sit, like last night before bed, I went and sat by the pool. I have a pool right next door here. And at this time of year, it's starting to clear up at night because before it would be cloudy because it was rainy season. and the stars are just incredible. There's no lights here. So I just sat and breathed and looked at the stars, and it really helped me get myself in a better place to go to sleep. So I don't know why I'm not seeing comments in this little, I don't know what's going on here, but it would be nice to see comments if I had any questions. Let me check on Instagram and see if I have any questions. It doesn't look like I have any questions, but there used to be on StreamYard, there used to be this like option where you would see, oh, there we go. Let me click on that. Good. Okay, I can see comments. So if you have any questions, comments, please leave that, and I can see most of them. I can't see Instagram here on StreamYard. I can check Instagram. But I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you for tuning in today. I really appreciate you being here. But in a summary, most people don't start where they are. Most people are starting at a much higher level than they're currently at. When you're a beginner, or if you've pushed yourself really hard, a lot of times taking a step back, looking at the fundamentals of, no matter, like Coach Summer and I had a really great like hour and a half conversation the other day. It was released yesterday, I believe. You can find it on YouTube, the evolution of Christopher Summer or Coach Summer. We talked about those foundational things, like in gymnastics, like forward rolls, back rolls. You know, he would have guys that were high level gymnasts that couldn't do a forward and back roll, and he would regress them and make them do the forward back roll. And then all of a sudden they some of the higher level activities would open up to them. You know, they asked Michael Jordan, you know, what do you do to practice all these crazy moves that you do? And he said, like, I'm obsessed about the basics. And so having that fundamental foundational habit of basics, and because we don't move around a lot, because kids don't play outside anymore, a lot of these kids haven't been exposed to basic calisthenics. They haven't been exposed to, you know, running and jumping and climbing fences and climbing trees and the things that kids used to do. So a lot of these things are missing. And if you load advanced training onto that, some people are going to adapt and survive, and most people are going to fall off. And so, and the other mistake that I've seen constantly is, one, not knowing the demands of your sport or your goal. So like if you're trying to lose body fat, marathons is not a good choice. Or if you're a soccer goalie, I dealt with this, a Division I soccer goalie in high school who was doing triathlons and powerlifting essentially to train for being a goalkeeper, and she kept hurting her back. And so we were like, I'm like, you're a goalie. You cover a box like, you know, you cover an area like like a quarter of the size of a basketball court. Like, you don't need to be running triathlons. If you really like triathlons, that's great, but you keep hurting your back, and you don't need to be a powerlifter. You can do that when you're done soccer. If you're injured, you can't play. So we had to change our training. A lot of the people I've attracted, particularly track athletes, they don't know when to leave the weight room. They get to a point where they're just like, if I do more, I'll get better. If I do more, I'll get better. And it's like, you got to go home. There's one girl I worked with for a couple of years who kept hurting herself in the weight room. And finally, we were able to get her dialed in where she understood, like, okay, once I've done this amount of work, I can just go. Or I need to dial down the intensity and do more moderate work. I can't be pushing all the time. You know, so getting people, Coach Summer and I had a discussion about this, and you know, because he's dealing with high level athletes, effort for him is like the like Olympian style people, which I've worked with people at that level as well, but that's not exclusively what I work with. But most of the people I attract are usually hard charging women that are mothers. They've got jobs, they've got kids, and they think that if I just train hard, if I just go to spinning class 4 times a week, I'm gonna get what I want. And getting them to switch that mentality from, I only need to do enough to get better, I only need to do enough to improve, to basically get an adaptation, as opposed to I'm just going to work till exhaustion. It's much harder for me anyways to get an overdoer to pull back, because they always want to do more. That personality type, they want to do more. They want to do more because more is going to equal better, as opposed to somebody who's not as motivated and a little bit lazy. I say, hey, let's just walk once a day. Okay. When you do that, let me know. They start walking once a day outside. They're like, I feel so much better. Well, let's go twice a day. Well, I feel even better. Let's go 3 times a day for 10 minutes. Oh, I feel even better. And they do that for a while, and they come back and they go, what can I do now? Well, let's add a protein at every meal, as opposed to the person that's doing all the things that doesn't know when to stop. They almost have a hard time simplifying. And Coach Summer and I talked about this extensively. Most of the great coaches I've been around, Lute Olson, I got to watch Rick Pitino a lot. Even the strength coaches that I worked for, the sports coaches that I trained under, I watched Charlie Francis a lot. The great coaches, you look at like Nick Saban, you look at Bill Belichick, they simplify things immensely. They make it so simple, do your job. Here's what you need to do. This is exactly what you need to do in this situation. A, B, C. They don't make it complicated. I don't think I've ever worked with any athlete or person that needed more complexity. Most of the people that I've worked with, I'd say all the people that I've worked with, needed some sort of simplification and some sort of just basics and consistency. And that's really the key. So the takeaway from this is like, start where you are, right? If you're in Tampa and you've got to go to Glacier National Park, you can't start in St. Louis. And so you gotta have a good idea of what your strengths and weaknesses are, and your weak areas and your strong areas. Another big mistake is people trying to play a sport that they're not built to play. And that's fun. If you're doing it recreationally, great, knock yourself out. But if you're trying to compete at a high level and you're a long, lanky person and you're trying to compete in Olympic lifting, probably not a good strategy, right? Now, if you want to do it for fun, that's great, no problem. But you're probably not going to be an elite level Olympic lifter if you're like have long arms, you're tall. Those are generally shorter people sports. Like gymnastics, if you're over 5'5", you're a dude. If you're like a woman in your gymnastics and you want to compete at a world-class level, you're probably going to be under 5'1". I mean, that's just a fact. You're a 5'10" woman, you're not going to be a world-class gymnast. It's just not going to happen. I've seen that a lot, especially with soccer. Kids that be put at soccer at a young age, and they get to high school and they don't have a soccer body. And they've developed some good skills, but they just don't have the body for it. And instead of switching to another sport or changing positions, I had one poor girl that was like 5'1", that was a goalkeeper, and I was just like, she wanted to play Division I college soccer, and I was like, I'm sorry, but you can jump out of the gym, you can have a massive vertical. They're going to take the girl who's 5'11", 6 foot, and she's got a big wingspan. Like, they're going to take that girl over you every single day of the week. Just like me, like, no matter Coach Summer and I Coach Summer, I think is 5'5" or 5'4", great gymnastics build. Him and I are never going to play in the NBA. Like, no matter how hard we train, no matter what we do, we could do the biggest vertical jump program in the world. Like, it's not going to happen. There's certain sports I'm built for. Like rock climbing is never going to be my forte. Swimming, if there was synchronized sinking, I would be amazing at it, right? But I'm just not built to swim. I got really short arms. I got really short, big legs. I've got a tall torso. I'm the opposite of what you'd want to be a world-class swimmer. That's why you look at all these Olympic athletes, they all generally look the same. Like, all the swimmers look the same. All the gymnasts look the same. There's a few exceptions here and there. Sports like football, there's a lot of variation because you got a guy like Tom Brady who's not very physically impressive, but he beats you with your mind. Guys like Steve Largent, who wasn't that athletic. Even Jerry Rice wasn't that fast, but Steve Largent, Jerry Rice, they had game speed, and they also ran their routes to perfection. They weren't the greatest athletes, but there's a lot of people in NFL. You can win with your mind, and you can win with different attributes, and you become a specialist. You can be an inside receiver like a Wes Welker or a Julian Edelman, where you can make up for your lack of height or size with athleticism, with the ability to run a route really clean, with your ability to be super, super smart. But a lot of people get caught up in like, I'm going to do this sport, and it's not really great for their structure and their anatomy. And a lot of people will be like, well, you can do anything you want, and that's not necessarily true. You can tell a kid that you're going to play in the NBA if he doesn't grow over 5, if he's not over 6'3", over 6'4", probably not going to happen, right? So you need to become the best version of yourself. I mean, that's another big thing too, is like, you'll have people that have a more athletic, husky, stocky build, and they're trying to look like somebody. You have women that want to look a certain way, or they want to look like a certain trainer or a certain celebrity, and they don't have the structure for it. So getting people to look at like, okay, how do I become the best version of me, as opposed to comparing themselves to everyone else, right? And that's become very difficult with things like Instagram and social media, where people are, you're only seeing their best pictures. You're only seeing seeing them at their best. A lot of the photos are photoshopped, and then of course a lot of the people that are influencers are on things that help them, stay lean year round. That's another big problem. That if you look at bodybuilding, you look at sports like that, because of the social media era. If you look back in Arnold's era, they would take months, and come off everything, and they would still look jacked, but they'd look more normal, right? They'd let their body recover, they'd let it heal, and then they would go back to being super lean and being on drugs and all those things. Today, because of the pressures of social media and always having to look a certain way, they're always on and never get a break. And that's another mistake I see too, is like people thinking that being super ultra lean is healthy. Some people can run really lean, but most of the people that are really, really lean are taking things to help them. Because once you get, as a guy, once you get below 10%, as a woman, once you get below 15%, if a woman is between 15 and 30, and a guy's between, I'd say 8 and 15, those are usually the sweet spots. And people think, I want to get really, really lean. Most people don't look their best when they're really, really lean. Most guys look their best around 10%, 12%. Everybody's a little different. Most women look their best between 15 and 20. You start getting below that, you start running into problems. You start running into hormonal issues. You start running into just not feeling good. And then people will take things to help overcome that. That's why most of the people that are big and ripped are usually taking some sort of hormone support. So understanding that if you want to be healthy, you don't have to be super ripped. If you're one of those people that just happen to be that way, that's great. But if you're a dude and you're between 8 and 15, 8 and 14, you're doing great. If you're a woman, you're under 30 and you're in between 15 and 30. And some women, I've seen women that just fall apart once they go under 20%. And so, they have a nice flat stomach. They look good. They look athletic. They get down below 20% and they just fall apart. So everybody's a little bit different. And so you need to basically do what's best for you and what's best for how you handle things. Some people do really well on a carnivore diet. Other people do not. That's another thing I've seen time and time again, is people getting married to a diet and refusing to have flexibility with it. They don't feel good. They lost some weight in the beginning and now it's stalled, and they refuse to add carbohydrates back in. Or the one I see a lot is no gallbladder, and nobody's told them that they need to take digestive support so they have bile. And then they go, the worst combination is somebody with no gallbladder that decides to go keto or carnivore, and then they're not taking digestive support. And even so, that's a lot of stress on the system when you don't have bile. And so getting them on a little more balanced diet is really, really important. I'm working really hard. I don't understand. I've got insulin resistance. I don't get it. I'm not eating any carbs and I still have insulin resistance. Well, the diet that they're on is putting so much stress on the system that it's causing major problems. So those are just a few things to think about. And I thought it would be fun to get on here. I am going to be doing a men's coaching group starting in January, basically taking people through a complete overhaul of lifestyle, working out, whether you're beginner or advanced. We're going to customize it for you. So if you're interested in getting into that group, you can contact me. You can message me on Instagram. I'll share a link below with recommended products and services. There'll be a link to book a call with me if you would like some help with that. I have my men's community that's up and running right now. We got about 250 guys in there where I answer questions. I do coaching Q&As every week. We're taking a little break with Christmas this week and New Year's. I'm going to be launching a women's community here soon. Had a big demand for that. A lot of requests for that. So that'll be a lot of fun. So that's what I have going on. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any. But the biggest thing I can tell you from almost 30 years of working with people is keep it simple. Be realistic with your goals. Two, make sure you have all the foundation established. If you want to be a performance beast, You're going to have spend a lot of time working on the base of the pyramid before you start chasing the top of the pyramid. And usually, if you have the base of the pyramid taken care of, the top of the pyramid usually takes care of itself for the most part. And then keep it simple. Take a look. If you're trying to lose body fat, like, are you getting enough sleep? Are you drinking enough water? Are you getting enough protein? Are you on any medications that are counterintuitive or not intuitive, or that are counter to you, like the side effects, like, the side effects are weight gain, and you're trying to lose weight and you're on a medication that's making you gain weight, or you're in chronic pain and you're on a statin. These are things that you need to take a look at, instead of just like banging your head against the wall and putting more effort in. You want to run faster. Do you have a good start? Is your mechanics decent? How well do you move? Can you run relaxed? Looking at your technique, do you know how to apply force into the ground? So start looking at things from a low hanging fruit perspective, and I think you'll find that you'll end up doing much better in the long run. Have yourself a great day. I hope you guys have a great Christmas. I hope you have a wonderful time with your family. Make sure you take the time to get outside, even if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. I grew up in Northern Canada, so getting outside in the cold is good for you. So make sure you take the time for that, and we'll see you again soon.